It is officially October, and thank God because I love Halloween. But before we can get emo and grungy, it is time to do another monthly reading wrap up and tell you about the 6 books I read in September, along with what they're about, what I rated them, and what I liked and disliked about them. Let me just tell you from the start that there is going to be no middle ground in any of these reviews. I seem to either loved or hated the books I read last month. So just a heads up that there are going to be some quite intense reviews in this video. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm Katarina. I make videos all about books, and if that's your thing, why not subscribe? Okay, so kicking September off, the very first book I read was Down the Drain, which is a memoir by Julia Fox. So this story is told through the Julia Fox, where she essentially recounts her life, from her wild childhood in Italy to her chaotic years growing up in New York City. And she leaves no stone unturned. She tells us about the very messy and unfiltered story of going through poverty and addiction and fame and motherhood, including some absolutely unbelievable stories of her going missing, becoming a sex worker, dating Kanye West. We literally see it all. And in the process, we witness how she survived abuse and heartbreak and the pressures of being a celeb. And I rated this 5 stars because honestly, this is probably one of the most mental books I've ever read. Like, I can't even describe to you just how absolutely bananas this book is. I couldn't put it down. I literally just had to keep reading chapter after chapter because I was just so aghast about all the things that this woman has went through in her life. Like, you think you've just read one thing that's absolutely bonkers, and then the next bit will be even more bonkers, and then the book just seems to continue like that all the way to the very end. I'm not even joking when I say that during reading this, I would literally text my friends things that were happening in the book. Like, I would literally be like, oh my god, there's this bit where Julia Fox, etc., etc. And that's something I actually rarely do because a lot of people in my life don't really care about what I read. But I just couldn't stop myself because this book was just unbelievable. I've honestly never really read anything like it. And it's not just the fact that her life was so wild and scandalous, which made this exciting to read, although that does very heavily contribute towards it, but it's also just so admirable to read about this woman's resilience and determinations despite the hardships she's endured, and how, despite how the media and the internet has painted her, she has decided to reclaim her own narrative. And I just adore a woman who is so unapologetically herself, and the honesty and vulnerability that she showcases in this memoir is honestly very inspiring. I absolutely love this. I had a blast reading it from start to finish, and it is just 5 stars, no question. However, for my next book, we know that my good luck in reading doesn't really tend to last. I talk about this joke a lot on my channel, but it's kind of weird how often it actually does play out, where whenever I seem to read a really good book, it's always followed by a complete flop, and it just seems to be this repeated cycle that just goes on and on. So the second book I read last month was The Orange and Other Poems by Wendy, and this is actually a poetry collection. And all the poems here essentially reflect on love and relationships and happiness, etc., etc., and essentially recognizing these small moments of joy in daily life. And I'm not going to oversell this book too much because I actually only gave it 1 star because honestly, the poetry here just absolutely sucked, which I know sounds super harsh to say, but it was just honestly so plain. I get that she was trying to write about these very profound and joyful moments in life, so I appreciate her message and her intention behind the poems are really sweet, but goddamn, the poetry was just so bad. It was just really boring. I genuinely have read better poetry written by 12-year-olds on Tumblr, and I'm not even exaggerating by saying that, because there was nothing really profound or interesting here, except from literally one poem called The Orange, which was the only one that was like semi-decent, but all the others were so dull, which makes sense because she clearly made the most interesting poem the title of her book, and rightly called the rest other poems because they're not even worth being mentioned properly. And honestly, I don't know whether I'm more mad about the fact that this poetry collection is so dull, or rather the sheer amount of positive reviews that this book has on Goodreads saying it was exceptional. Because I finished this book annoyed, and that's not something that usually happens to me when reading poetry collections. I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority here, but I kind of doubt that because I just think objectively this book was not good, and I would say don't waste your time with it if you actually want to read decent poetry. Again, I know that sounds really harsh, and I'm probably going to have people in the comments come at me for being kind of mean, but honestly, I just feel really strongly about this, and I do not recommend reading this book. So before I talk about this book too much and get mad again, let's move on to the third book I read last month, which, as we know how my luck yo-yos, was a much better book than the last one, and that's My Name is Lucy Barton by Elizabeth Strout. This fictional book follows a woman who is called Lucy Barton, and she's a writer, and she's hospitalized for an extended extended period of time after, I believe, a routine procedure goes wrong. So she's in this hospital room in New York City, and she's basically just overlooking the city and wishing that she was out there with everybody else. However, at the very start, her estranged mother actually unexpectedly visits her after years of no contact. They spend several days together, and through various conversations, we uncover their very complex and strained mother-daughter relationship, as well as her traumatic and struggled upbringing in Illinois. And in the process, Lucy begins to confront her feelings of deep loneliness, her longing for love, and her struggle with her relationship with her mother. And I love this book. I rated it 4.5 stars, which is honestly something I didn't expect going into it. I've seen this book around, but I haven't really seen anyone sing its praises. And to be totally honest with you, I didn't even know what this book was about before picking it up. I just actually saw it in a charity shop and I was like, huh, I've seen this book around. Why not? And I'm so glad I picked it up because I honestly adored it. It's taken me a while to pinpoint why specifically I like the book so much because there's no real plot here. It's very introspective and psychological. It's one of those where you really meditate on it only after you finish reading it and you think about yourself in the position of the main character and how you'd feel if you'd gone through all these things. And it's a story that really makes you reflect on the big things in life, such as, can we ever really escape our pasts? Are you truly ever able to heal from a devastating childhood, even if you physically move so far away from it? Does a deep sadness like that ever really go away? Is there always love between mothers and daughters in relationships? And is it your mum's fault, or is it just a product of her own upbringing and the circumstances that she had? This novel is just very quiet and meditative, but at the same time extremely raw and heavy, and that was quite interesting to see both those parallels within one narrative. I actually ended up crying at one point in the novel, which I totally didn't expect to, but your girl is an empath, so she ends up crying out a lot of weird things. I just love this book. It felt incredibly real, especially the conversations that they had with each other. It just felt very accurate of how they would have gone. I love complex and deep characters, especially women, and I think this book was just absolutely fantastic. Would definitely recommend it, and it's also part of a series of 3 other books, which I will be picking up very shortly because I very much enjoyed this. But moving on, it's time for our next book, and you're probably wondering, is it another disappointment because of how your luck usually plays out? And you'd be right, because God knows why the universe does this to me. And this book may actually surprise some of you, but the next book I read was Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. This story is set in 1960s Los Angeles, and we follow a Hollywood actress who is essentially going through a nervous breakdown. She goes through a couple of traumatic events, which we're told about retrospectively, but in the novel we follow her as she goes through aimless drives throughout the desert, along with attending many hollow parties with fake film industry friends, as well as taking up different lovers whilst her marriage is falling apart, and just overall struggling with dealing with life when everything feels very detached and surreal. And I gave this book 2 stars, which, trust me, incredibly pained me to do because I was really hoping that I was going to enjoy this. I've heard so many good things about this book. I always see it recommended with books from other authors like Sylvia Plath and Atessa Moshfegh, but to me this really was just uninspiring and I guess a little predictable, which I don't really want to use that word because I know that this story reflects real life things that went on in Hollywood during this era, but it was just predictable. We have a pill popping actress who attends parties and has affairs and is depressed. You know, in other breaking news, water is wet. But besides from the plot being kind of uninteresting, my biggest grievance with this book was that it was so terribly written. It was just lifeless. Like, it was such a struggle to get through. Like, everything was just described in such a mediocre way, and all the characters were so boring. Like, I just didn't care for any of them. Maybe the author was trying to purposely be nonchalant to show the very detached way that this character was feeling, but it was just so unengaging to read as a reader that I really struggled to finish it. Last year, I also read Joan Didion's My Year of Magical Thinking, which I also didn't really love. So I just think I'm not really a fan of Joan Didion's writing because I swear these are her 2 biggest books and I just wasn't a fan of either of them. I don't know, maybe I'll pick up another one of her works in some time, but I'm not rushing to pick anything else up now. So yeah, didn't really like this book, which is a shame because I was really hoping to, but it was just honestly kind of boring. However, my next book was not boring in the slightest, which probably comes to no surprise. And that book that I read last month was Notes on a Scandal Scandal by Zoe Heller. So this story is actually based in North London, which is where I live currently, so that was already a fun aspect to read. And we follow a history teacher that's been at this secondary school for years, and she then befriends the school's new art teacher. However, she finds out that this new teacher is actually having a secret affair with one of her students, and we basically witness the drama that ensues from this discovery. I'd say that this is a psychological novel that very much delves into the complexities of human relationships as well as the boundaries of trust, as well as examining the dynamics in power and manipulation, along with the price of secrecy and the complex nature of friendship. And I absolutely love this book, and I gave it 5 stars, which, trust me, I'm as shocked as you are that I gave 2 books in 1 month 5 stars. This book was honestly phenomenal. I was speechless after reading it, I'll be so real with you. Firstly, the writing was impeccable. It was so well done. Every sentence was just so intentionally crafted and well put together that it's books like these that reminds me how impressive some authors can be. There was no moment in this book that I didn't enjoy, because even the slower moments were still so well written that it was enjoyable to read. Secondly, the plot here and the character motivations is unlike anything that I've ever read. We followed this lonely middle-aged woman who is essentially a spinster, and it's not immediately obvious, but she is just riddled with jealousy and manipulation. And it's so interesting to see the way that she positions herself as a friend for this other teacher. But instead we see this very dark and possessive side of her that yearns for control. It's so layered, and the characters are so complex and fleshed out that they feel so real. I initially thought this was going to be quite a painful read given the plot because, well, let's be real, it's not the funnest of topics being explored. But god, this book was so good because you don't even really realize who the true villain is here. And on top of it all, the story touches on so many important and relevant topics that give extra weight to the plot itself, such as class differences, gender differences, power dynamics, repressed desires. And probably the one that sticks out most above all is loneliness and what this does to people. It actually scared me at times whilst reading it how I related to the character in some ways in this very bone deep loneliness that she was feeling. I think if you've ever felt this type of pure loneliness where you feel so hollow inside that the main character is feeling, then you'd also be very impressed with the book at how accurately the author showcases it. So I would definitely recommend picking this up. It had so many things in it that made it so good, and it was just a wild read. And finally, the last book I read in September, which may come as a shock, was not a bad book, but actually a banger. I know, we've broken the cycle of a bad book following a good one. Praise the Lord. And that book is Chess Story by Stephen Zweig. I actually spoke about this in my last video of my autumn TBR list, so apologies if this is going to be familiar. But this book is set on board a cruise ship on its way to Buenos Aires, and on board is an international chess prodigy. This obviously stirs the interest of all the other passengers on board, and they challenge him to play a game of chess with them as a group. And amongst these passengers, there is one mysterious man who just seems to have extraordinary chess skills, but we learn his complicated backstory and why he's so consumed by the game. This novel is heavy in themes of obsession, isolation, and the capacity of the human mind. And I really enjoyed this book and rated it 4.5 stars. What a blessing to finish the month on a high. So this book is actually super short. It's actually technically a novella because it's less than 100 pages. But in my opinion, this is how you write a novella. This is the perfect example. Despite it being so short, it is still well written, intense, and also very moving. It gave just enough detail that was relevant for what you needed to know on the main characters, but it also just got into the plot and the drama of the book immediately so you weren't bored. And it also genuinely surprised me because I thought this was purely just going to be a book on chess, the game itself, but it turned out to be so much more than that, and it's actually more focused on the human mind, on its abilities and limits, and how addiction can lead to madness. Don't worry if you don't know how to play chess if you want to read this. The technicalities of the game isn't central to the plot, so you won't not get the book if you don't know how to play the game, but if you do know how to play, it will just kind of add that extra layer. Does that make any sense? This novella is just also incredibly well written because the majority of the novella is just the guy retelling a story. But the story is told so well that when I finished the book, I thought, now that is good storytelling. That is how you tell a story. I actually like this book so much that I gave my boyfriend a copy of it, and he doesn't really read much fiction, but he likes chess, and I genuinely think that he would enjoy this also. So I'd very much recommend this book for you if you also like chess and you just want a quick and easy read, because I thought this was a solid novella. And there you have it. Those are all the books I read in September. In terms of my personal life, September for me is really a time to just appreciate the very last bit of summer. So I spent a lot of time trying to be outside as much as possible to make the most of the warmer weather and longer days. This included walks with my friends as well as walks on my own, particularly appreciating nature and the beauty that that has to offer because I know that I won't be seeing scenes like this again until probably next April. Work has also been incredibly busy now that the summer holidays are over, so I've been spending a lot of time at work, including working late. I actually don't know how I still manage to get through the number of books I do. Working in corporate London is not for the weak, let me tell you that. But I hate being a workaholic, so I try and find balance in spending time with people I love, which included a lot of birthdays last month, as I seem to know a lot of people born in September. I just seem to know a lot of Virgos and Libras. I don't know why. But overall, September was a really lovely month. I actually really enjoyed it. Summer for me was super hectic, so it's kind of nice to take a little bit more of a slower pace and just enjoy relaxing a little bit more. In terms of films I watched, a lot of them were rewatches, including the first Spider-Man film, which is actually one of my favorite films of all time. I also watched both of the Scooby-Doo films because why not? I also rewatched Escape from Pretoria. I think that's how it's pronounced because it's such an excellent film. It gives you mad anxiety, but it's still really good, and Daniel Radcliffe is incredible in it. And actually, the only new film I watched last month was Anyone But You. Horrible watch, do not recommend. I'm also now on the last season of Sex and the City, which I am in denial about finishing it soon. Don't talk to me about it. But anyway, there you have it. That was my September wrapped up in a nutshell. What was your September like? Let me know in the comments what you got up to, and also please let me know what were your favorite books that you read last month. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below, and if you're new here, why not subscribe? I make videos chatting about all things books. Feel free to also follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update in real time what books I'm reading, and feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post the books I've read, letting you know what they're about and what I rate them out of 10. Sending lots of love to my returning subscribers who continually watch and support me, and I love you all so much, and I hope you're doing okay, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.